Hello, and welcome to the Career Change Diaries with me, Alice Stapleton. And today we are speaking to Hannah Stange. And after studying forensic psychology, she spent 3.5 years working in the finance and private equity sector before changing into the civil service as a trainee probation officer 12 months ago, and we just worked out that it was 12 months exactly tomorrow. So hi Hannah, lovely to see you.
Hi,
And thank you
Alex.
for joining us on the podcast, especially as you've just told me you are on holiday and just
Yes.
celebrating your engagement. So I'm really
Yes, indeed.
chuffed that you still managed to spare some time to talk to us, and really looking forward to sharing your career change journey, and also quite interesting because I changed career away from being a probation
Yes.
officer, so it's always helpful just to acknowledge that what's right for one person has challenges for another, and vice versa.
Yeah,
So looking forward to getting into it. Okay,
absolutely.
so first of all, just tell me a little bit about the career and the work that you were doing before you decided to make a change.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I did study psychology and forensic psychology because I was always interested in that, and then somehow ended up working in finance. So I had a job at a financial technology company for a year, and then I changed into my last job before my career change, where I was 2.5 years, and that was within the private equity sector. Basically, we worked with private equity funds quite closely when they were looking at making an investment. We would help them find people who have worked in those industries before, who could help them advise on the investment, whether it was a good idea, whether it was a bad idea, pointing out the different things to keep in mind. So it was essentially, you could probably compare it most closely to kind of a headhunting job.
Right.
And I kind of stayed there for 2.5 years. And in the beginning, I was kind of doing the groundwork on projects, and then moved up relatively quickly to managing small teams as well. So that's what I was doing at the end of my time there. I was managing a team of 4 or 5 people.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it's got on the surface sounds quite interesting to be
yeah,
amongst
yeah,
all of that. You said there that somehow you ended up in that world.
yeah.
Tell me a bit more about that, because it's, I hear that a lot from clients that, their careers just sort of happen or they fall into it.
Happened.
But
Yeah,
how did
yeah.
you
No,
end up
absolutely.
there?
So for me, I'm not from the UK. I live there now, but I'm not originally from there. I moved there from Germany, and after finishing my studies, I really wanted to stay in London. And for me, it was kind of a case of, I have to find a job in order to be able to stay. Um, so I kind of went out and looked for jobs, and the first one that I found and got an offer for was in the finance industry. So I thought, I'll do it
Mm.
for a year or so. During that time, I'll look for something else, and then I'll move on from that. And I did, after a year, change job, but stayed in the finance industry. It was essentially, the job was advertised as being quite research focused, which was something I was interested in. So not necessarily having to work with numbers or anything. It was more about the research that we would be doing on projects. So that was something I was quite interested at the time. And I learned a lot from that job. And I think at the beginning there was a lot of research involved, but I think it was quite different from how I expected it to be, essentially. It did turn out to be, a great learning opportunity, especially having management experience quite early on in my career. And I was quite young as well. That was great. But then, there were things then where I thought, I don't think I want to make this my career for much longer. And that's when I kind of started to think about, oh, I think I kind of accidentally fell into this industry that I actually am not very interested in. And yeah, that kind of was the point where I made a decision to, figure out how I want to spend, maybe not the rest of my life, but the next 10, 20 years. So yeah.
Okay. So it sort of started off because you wanted to stay in the UK. And there was that sort of urgency or need to find a role. And then that second role then, so it sounded like on paper you thought it would be something that you'd be interested in. Were there larger doubts about your career path at that time as well, or did you think actually, we'll see what this next step looks like?
I think the bigger picture for me wasn't there yet. I think I was, how old was I? 23, I think, when I started that job. So I still hadn't really figured out what I wanted to do in the long run. I think for me, it was like, okay, this will give me, some new experiences, some new ideas, maybe. Maybe it will be a good, job to have on my CV, doing research for, in an industry. I was thinking maybe I'll go back to academia, continue studying, do academic research, something like that. But looking at the bigger picture and looking back now, I know that I was quite lost in a way. So I kind of went with the flow to some extent, which is very unlike me in general. But yeah, that's kind of how it all kind of played out at that time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and it's often the way people, the first job, and then they just sort of follow their nose and into the second job. Okay, so tell me a bit more then about some of the niggles and the doubts that you had about your career as a whole, and that second role not quite meeting expectations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things for me was that I really wanted to work in a job where I could help people. I studied psychology because I'm interested in how people think and behave, and I did my master's degree in forensic psychology because that whole space is something that I've always been really interested in, and that's always I kind of knew that I would kind of end up in that area at some point somehow, but didn't have any specific jobs in mind how I could do that really. So I was quite unsure about how to get there. And I think I just wasn't feeling fulfilled by what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And it was quite a stressful job. So I was, I didn't have much time and energy to think about, okay, what am I actually going to do in the long run? So in that sense, I got a bit stuck there. And I think for me, it was about figuring out kind of what do I want to do? What can I see myself doing for a good amount of years without getting bored, without feeling like I'm not doing kind of what I'm meant to do in the world, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's one thing for each of us that we should be doing, but I think there's probably, a few things that kind of make us feel like we're doing the right thing for us and, for the values that we hold and things like that. And I think I was just not entirely sure about what those values were and how I could, make them into a job essentially. So I think that's kind of where I was struggling to sort out, all the ideas that I had. And I had different ideas and they didn't really go together at all. And so I had completely different directions that I could see myself going into. But then making that decision was where I kind of got stuck at that time really. Yeah.
So lots of ideas, vague sense of the direction that you wanted to go in, but not necessarily the specifics, as well as then not really having the mental space or the physical time to actually I guess, sort of sit down and
work on it.
figure all of that out by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that you weren't really feeling that fulfilled in your previous career. What were some of the other signs or, sort of doubts that you had about that career being the one you would carry on with?
So I think for me, it was kind of looking at the purpose of my job in that
Right.
industry. I think for me, it was after a while became quite clear that what I was doing was essentially helping, wealthy people gain more money. And, while it was interesting to work on those different projects and everything, I think for me, I always saw myself as someone who would go on to help people who are in need of help and who are struggling, and who I can, support on an individual basis rather than supporting, big firms, big companies, things like that. So I always wanted to kind of work with individual people who were struggling with more, I guess, existential problems in their lives. I always, I would say that I enjoy solving problems and supporting people and listening to people and finding out about their lives, and you know, kind of figuring out ways to help them. And that just was not at all what I was doing in that role. I was helping someone, but it wasn't the group of individuals or people or the group in society that I wanted to support, essentially. So I think that was, one of the main things that kind of kept bothering me, and I felt like I was kind of wasting my time, maybe being in that role, not doing what I wanted to do, really. But then also, apart from, just the job itself, I just, in that role, just didn't have time to do, anything after work. I would work very long hours, and on the weekends I would be, tired, and I would just rest all weekend and then go to work again on Monday. And I just missed also having a full life and not just working, but also having time to do things that I enjoy doing in my free time. And that kind of that fell away completely during those 2.5 years in that company. And it was difficult for me to, maintain friendships and, have enough time to spend with people that are important to me. And I just realized after a while that that was all, taking a toll on people around me, but also myself. And I, was just struggling with that as well. Had an effect on my mental health, my physical health. I'm sure everybody who's had a job where you work really long hours and there's a lot of pressure on you has experienced that to some extent. And at some point, I just felt like, enough is enough. Essentially, I need to change something. Otherwise, who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
I felt like I was on the way to burnout, basically, at that point.
Okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it sounds like, you got to a point where you thought, well, it just can't carry on
Yeah,
like this, as you
exactly.
say, when it
Yeah.
starts affecting mental health, physical health. Okay. So then I imagine that's when you started looking for career coaches and came across
Yes.
me, and we started our journey together. So I suppose, well, actually, prior to that, I can certainly hear that one of the barriers to moving forward was, not entirely sure which direction you wanted to go in specifically. Yeah. But what else do you think was causing that confusion, or just your stuckness and inability to decide or move forward?
Yeah, so I definitely, not knowing what to look for. I think I was a bit overwhelmed. There's so many jobs, so many careers. If you go online and look, for jobs, I want to help people, but there are so many ways of doing that. And I would get quite overwhelmed when I would, take the time to Google a few things and write down some ideas. So many things would come up, and I would just be like, okay, this is too much to kind of sort through right now. And I kind of kept putting it off as well because I was tired from working. And then also I had such different ideas that would go into very different directions. On one hand, I wanted to work with people, in a forensic setting. So I was thinking, oh, I really want to work in a prison, for example. On the other hand, I had ideas like, I want to be a professional organizer. So, it's like completely different directions. I was like, what should I focus on? Can I combine them somehow? I don't know. So I was overwhelmed by all of that. But then also there were considerations that were kind of more practical for me. So, what kind of job would be doable in London, in the UK, but also maybe in a few years, since I'm not from there and my partner's not from there, maybe we want to move back to Germany or Italy or somewhere else. And what can I do now that I'll be able to do in a different country, maybe? So that was another consideration for me to make. Also, financial questions, it's not cheap to live in London or anywhere these days. So I had to kind of make considerations regarding that too, kind of how much of a pay cut could I take, or could I, afford maybe having a few months without a job between jobs if that kind of came up. So that was also a big thing. That was difficult to figure out. And I think all of that combined was just kind of putting me in a state of, where do I start basically figuring all these issues out? It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It is a lot, absolutely. Yeah, and I remember going through it myself, as you say, it just becomes a bit overwhelming, and it's that sort of paradox of choice. There is so much choice and opportunity, which is a real privilege, and it's fantastic. But yeah, it sort of comes with that rabbit in headlights. You don't really know which way to go, and then all the sort of fears about money and where you're going to live, and as you say, if you think you might want to move abroad, what's going to transition well. As you say, it's a lot. Okay, so then obviously we spent quite a while working together figuring things out, but in summary, what do you think it was that really helped solidify your thinking around what it was that you were going to go and do next?
All right. So I think one of the things was figuring out kind of what my values were, not just related to work and like specifically things I would want to do at work, but more broadly speaking, how I kind of want to, live my life and what's important to me as a person as well. I think that already to some extent excluded some of the jobs that I had thought about. Because, when you have a list of very clear values that are important to you and a list of jobs and you kind of, cross-check them, some of the jobs just won't fulfill that. And I wanted to find something, that would actually kind of meet those values, because I knew that would mean that I would, most likely feel fulfilled and feel like I was doing something that was right for me, basically. So that was quite helpful to kind of talk through and put into words and write it down and everything like that. And then the other thing was also looking at how I wanted my life to be like more generally, so outside of work, thinking about, how much free time do I want to have? How do I want my life to look like? Like I already mentioned, kind of where do I want to live? Or, after COVID, how many times a week do I want to be in the office? Things like that. How do I want my day to look like and my weekends to look like? There are some jobs where you just won't have a lot of free time and where you will be required to work on the weekends. And, I kind of had, I think after my last job, quite a clear idea of what I didn't want to do. And how I didn't want my work-life balance to look like. And I think that was really helpful to just kind of, visualize that as well, to, just take the time to think about that and not just focus on the job itself, but everything around it too. And yeah, I think those are kind of the two key things, but also just having the freedom to, with your guidance, kind of writing down all the ideas that I had. And, I think I made quite a long Excel spreadsheet with lots of different things that were completely different, and then over time, adding new ideas, and also kind of organizing them, okay, these things, they might be fun in theory, but maybe not for me. And just going through that process of accepting, I think, that some things are just not for me, and that's fine. And I don't have to, try to make them work. Like, for example, I think one big thing for me, which I've heard from other people that they struggle with that too, when you go to university, maybe there are people who have an expectations that you're going to go on and do a PhD or something if you're in a specific area. And I always thought about it, and I just knew that wasn't for me. And, just making that decision, being like, okay, I just don't want to do it, and that's fine, and I'll do something else. Going through that process with you was, for me, really helpful. But then also, being encouraged to go out and talk to people. I had a list of a few, maybe like, kind of a short list after a while of things that I could actually see myself doing. And then just taking the time to reach out to people on LinkedIn or via email or whatever who were doing those jobs, and actually talking to them and finding out firsthand, how is it to have that job? And does it sound like the kind of job or life that I, imagine myself having in a few years' time? That was something that I hadn't thought about myself doing, and kind of having the encouragement from you to do that, and having those conversations and recording that information, and, adding that kind of to the pro and con list of all the jobs, really, that was super helpful. And I mean, with you, I had someone who actually was doing one of the jobs that was on my list, in the past as a probation officer. That was obviously great. And you had lots of connections, and, just going through that process was really, really valuable for me to kind of get a clear picture and slowly reduce the long list to a short one.
Well, because you're right. Well, once you've got a sense of what your values are and what your criteria is, it is a sort of natural process of elimination. Some of those will stack up really well, and some, as you say, they just don't. And it sounds like a big part of it for you was letting go of that, almost, and letting go of perhaps expectations that you thought other people had for you, or maybe even that you thought you had for yourself, but just really sitting with those and working out what your priorities are. Okay, and how did you feel reaching out to people who were doing what you were interested in doing and that sort of thing?
I think in the beginning I was kind of feeling like, oh, I don't want to bother them. But then I was thinking about, even in my previous job, sometimes I had people who were thinking about applying to that company, messaging on LinkedIn and asking, like, can I ask you some questions about your work there? And it would never bother me. So I kind of just thought, okay, surely if they don't have the time, that's fine, but I don't have anything to lose by reaching out to them. So, just kind of, I guess, going through the process of looking for people who, looked like they might be kind of in a position that I would maybe be in a few years' time, and just reaching out to them, with a quick message, but also being, prepared for people not having the time or not responding at all. And that was fine. But it was, at some point I was just like, I don't have anything to lose. It's a useful exercise
so much to
go
gain.
Through. Exactly. And most people were so happy to, either have a quick call or just, send emails back and forth with some questions and answers and things like that. And I don't think anybody said no. So
Well, and that's such a great reminder. Sure. I think we seem to always sort of assume the worst of each other. Like,
yes.
Oh, they're going to be really horrible, and they're going to be really, inconvenienced. But we forget that actually most people are really supportive, and actually we all love talking about ourselves. So tapping into that and hearing their stories. Okay, so probation was one of the ideas on your list. Can you remember what it was that made you sort of finally decide that was the direction that you were going to go in? And so how sure did you feel that was going to be the right thing for you?
Yeah, I think it was an option that I wasn't expecting to be on the list, because I never even thought about that job, really. I knew that it existed, but it didn't come to mind when I would think about what kind of job I might want to do. But obviously, I was talking to you about, the things I'm interested in, including kind of working, with people who have been convicted of crimes and things like that. That's what I studied as well. And I think that was at the kind of towards the end of the whole kind of decision-making process of what I wanted to do. That was one of the main things that I knew I wanted to do. And that was quite important to me as well. And I also knew that I didn't want to go back to university and continue studying. I knew that I didn't see myself as a psychologist, but, I still wanted to work with people firsthand. And I think after obviously talking to you and talking to, I think, one of your former colleagues as well, who was still working in probation for a while, and talking to someone who was doing the training at the moment that I would be doing if I, decided to go down that path. I had a lot of information about, the short term, how it would be in training, but also the long-term opportunities and, progression and working within the Ministry of Justice, not just probation, but, it also kind of opening doors for me. I think all of that combined made me feel like, I think this might be what I'm supposed to do, because it has it matches all the values that I had. It matched what I wanted my workday to look like. It would create opportunities for me to also work in other areas of the justice system. And it kind of just clicked in a way. It was just kind of a feeling almost. I was like, oh, this is perfect for me. And I was a bit hesitant, maybe you remember, making a decision of like, what am I going to decide? Because it felt like it is a big decision to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do next with my career, after struggling to kind of figure that out. But I think just having gone through the process before with you to, define all those things in terms of values and ideal working day, ideal work-life balance, working environment, working with people, all of that, it just matched all of it. And I just thought, I'm just going to obviously trust my gut as well, and my feelings that I have towards the idea of doing that job. But also, I had data to support the decision, because we had done all the work before. So that actually really helped me, just say, okay, this is the right thing for me. It feels right, and it's right on paper, and the information that I've gathered sounds great. So that's what I'm going to do. Yeah.
So it's sort of testing the match out on paper by the sounds of it, but then you tested it out in real life too. And then, you've got that added sort of instinct and added draw towards the idea. And really great to hear you talking about, you looked at what the career was going to be in the short term, but also the medium and the long term. I always think that's really important when you're considering a career change, not just looking at, because I guess either can put you off. Some people think, oh, well, I'm not going to do it because I only actually want that long-term career, or vice versa. So really great to sort of hear, as you say, that you looked at the sort of longevity of of it all. And actually, you know, I don't know if encouraging is the right word, reassuring to hear that, you know, there is always a bit of a hesitation. You know, I think we're only human. We're not always like 100% absolutely sure about our decisions sometimes. And as you say, there can feel like there's a lot of weight attached to a career decision, and it's sort of moving forward based on, as you say, the data that you've got to go on at the time, and how that sits with you. So okay, so tell me a little bit then about the transition, because yes, two very different careers. The new one, probation, obviously involving a training period as well. Talk me through what that looked like and how you navigated it, I guess financially as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, a big part of that whole transition was kind of planning ahead as much as I could. So, you know, obviously I had to apply for the job or the training program, and that took a while. So I kind of had to figure out, okay, how long is it going to take until I know the answer, you know, until I know that I'm going to be doing this or not. And I think I was quite sure that that's what I wanted to do. But then I was also, okay, what if it doesn't work out? What if I don't get accepted? What do I do then? So I kind of made a bit of a plan B for myself as well that still went into that direction, but just I basically applied for other jobs within the Ministry of Justice and the Prison and Probation Services in parallel to the application for the training to become a probation officer, just because I thought if it doesn't work out this year, basically, or the year that I applied, I'll, you know, find something that I can do that matches a lot of the values and plans and things that I had, but maybe is a bit different. But then maybe through that experience, I can then apply again a year later, and I'll get maybe, you know, through additional experience that I have, I get into it then, you know. So I kind of had two plans in parallel that kind of led to the same destination, but just one would take a bit longer. So I think that was helpful for me to not, you know, send out that one application, then just put all my eggs in one basket, basically. You know, I kind of felt like it would be good. Yeah, just, you know, to ease the anxiety about the whole thing a little bit, I just sent out some applications in parallel and kind of, eased my mind a bit through that. But then also, you know, I kind of thought about, when do I quit my current job? You know, how long is my notice period going to be? Do I want a break between the two jobs? And I felt like I really needed a break. You know, I was quite exhausted, and I was like, I want to start the new job in a very positive way. You know, I want to be rested. I want to be ready to really do the work and kind of throw myself into it. And I knew at that point, you know, I needed a bit of time off. So I did the application. I went through all the process. You know, it's quite a long process. There's a whole kind of assessment center connected to it. In the end, I did get an offer, but then I still didn't know when I would start. So they kind of, you know, they drag it out quite a bit. So for me, it worked out very well because I had, because I kind of had planned ahead. I was kind of expecting there to be a bit of a break between my last day at my old job when my notice period was over, to the start of the new job. So I assumed that I would have to kind of bridge a few months in between. So, you know, when deciding when to hand in my notice, I also considered the financial side of things. I thought, okay, how much do I have to have saved to comfortably, you know, bridge those few months between jobs without completely stressing out, basically. And, you know, the planning was important.
Yeah. Well, and just to clarify, because people may not know, so with the probation training, it's paid, isn't it? Yeah. So you knew that you were moving into a training role, but that it was paid, so it was just
Exactly.
that gap that you needed to manage.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the gap between last day at the old job and first day at the new job, where I knew I wasn't entirely sure how long that was going to be. Eventually I did find out, and it worked out to be, I think, around 2.5 months or something. But I just wanted to be prepared and not, stress. I wanted to be able to pay my rent and, the basics, basically. So yeah, that was a lot of planning involved, and, having conversations about finances with my partner, for example, which can be very difficult. I struggle to talk about that a lot, but I think just, if you're living with someone, or if you're in a relationship with someone, or, you have a close friend or a close family member who's going to be affected in some way by you making that career change, you kind of want their support and their, I guess, agreement to everything. Obviously, it's your own job, but you need to kind of, I think, have those difficult conversations as well, so that everyone's on the same page and they know what kind of support you need as well. And that was quite a big thing for me, I think. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and as you say, I think it can be really difficult for people. So again, just stepping out your comfort zone and having that sort of temporary pain for the long-term gain, and what it would lean towards. And so I imagine we all know that the civil service doesn't pay what it should do. So I imagine there was a bit of a pay drop. So how have you managed that with rent and lifestyle and living in London and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, it definitely was, it's a big difference to kind of the salary that I had before. I think, it hasn't been entirely easy, it's just, I think once you get used to having a certain amount of disposable income, you get used to things. And, I luckily, I knew how much I was going to make at the civil service. And, as a trainee probation officer, you have quite a low salary, but then once you're qualified, it increases, to a decent salary. So I knew even this was going to be temporary. I'm a year in, I have 9 more months to go. So from next summer onwards, it will become easier again. So, just kind of knowing that it's not forever and that will get better. That was helpful to know in terms of the planning. But then also just knowing, okay, for these, so my training is 21 months long, knowing that for that time, I just have to, make compromises and say, okay, right now I can't afford this, and, being okay with it. Because for me, it was worth, sacrificing a higher salary, but in turn getting a job that would feel better and that would make me happier, and having more free time and things like that. That was a trade-off that was worth it for me. So, I think is obviously an important thing to consider, especially, I don't have children, so that's something that I don't have to think about. But if somebody, has to support a bigger family, that's obviously, important to kind of consider as well. And again, that's where, maybe external support can also come in, or just having someone to talk about it, really. But just, having the right expectations of what you can do with a lower salary, and kind of where you maybe just have to say, okay, it's not going to be a big holiday this year, but, in the future, and kind of seeing it that way helped me a lot.
Yeah. So sort of acknowledging that it's just a temporary sacrifice. And actually in the longer run, it's that more meaningful, fulfilling career that you're probably going to get more from than sort of, I don't know, various bonuses over the years,
exactly,
or whatever. I was reading a book about how sort of shifting that perception of rich being just to do with money. Like, we can be rich in so many different areas of
Absolutely.
our lives, and some of those actually have a more meaningful and fulfilling impact than just pounds in our pockets.
Yeah.
Okay. So how are you finding it now that you've made the transition?
I'm really happy with how things kind of played out. I think, I was very anxious about making that change, which I think is probably very normal, because it was such a big change as well. It wasn't just going into a job that is, in a similar career, but it was like a complete turnaround. So I think I've been trying to really embrace it, and I've been able to just do so many more things. I'm not completely exhausted at the end of the day, so I have time. Little things like cooking dinner, for example. I never had the time and energy to do that before, and now it's something that I found out I really enjoy doing. It's just those small things that make like a huge difference to how I feel. And I think when we were trying to figure out what I should do as a next career move, one of the things that came up that I really enjoy doing is yoga, for example. And I was like, okay, maybe it's just not going to be possible, but I'm actually in 2 weeks, I'll have my final assessment for my yoga teacher training. So, I actually found the time and energy to do that just for myself. So it's just been such a huge change in that, I've had time to do the things I always wanted to do. And just overall, I would say I'm much, much happier and feel more like I'm living like a more authentic life, if that makes sense. I'm following my values. I'm, not just thinking about, oh, it'd be nice to do this and that. I'm actually doing it. So, as difficult as it has been sometimes with, kind of making decisions and figuring out things financially, it's kind of all turned out probably even better than I thought it would, and it's just, I feel like I'm just myself now, and that's really great. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can certainly see that in you. You're much more just sort of settled.
Yes, settled, sort of exactly.
Self-assurance. And as you say, just that you're kind of being authentic and just following what's important to you. What have you found quite hard? I mean, you've mentioned the financial transition. Anything else that you've found particularly hard about changing career that you've managed to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, this might be quite specific to kind of the job I had before and what I'm doing now, but going from the private to the public sector was a big change in terms of, how my work is structured and what I kind of do on a day-to-day basis. And, in my old job, I didn't have, a lot of freedom around how I would do my job. And now, I'm also lucky that I have a really great manager who kind of, lets me do my job, and she trusts me with making decisions and things like that. But in the beginning, when you're used to having a manager who, tells you exactly what they want you to do, and, you always have a very clear plan, to changing to having, a lot more freedom in that sense. On one hand, it's great, but also it takes some time to get used to. So I think so. Just the difference in terms of the industry that I worked in before and work in now, getting used to that and getting used to how people, talk to each other and how people are at work. That's probably going to be the case for anyone who changes industry. It's just a different atmosphere, basically. So, kind of adapting to that and kind of finding your own place in that new industry and figuring out, what kind of probation officer do I want to be, or, what kind of whatever do I want to be, and how do I want to, live that change, not just at work, but also in life in general. So, while all those things are very positive, the change in the beginning was very difficult for me as well. And, letting go of doubts. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I just, after a while, I was just, kind of needed to slow down a bit and just give myself the time to adapt and not kind of, rush into anything and not be too hard on myself for, not figuring things out immediately, but kind of just giving myself the time to just, arrive and settle in and figure things out. Yeah, that was a bit difficult, but yeah.
I think that's such a great point, because when you go from a sector, an industry and a job that well, that you can almost do standing on your head, to completely different way of doing things, as you say. Sort of, I mean, I was slightly smirking because I went the other way, so I left probation and I went into the corporate private world, and it's this sort of big glass office, and but I love that, just giving yourself time to arrive and almost believing that you can sit through that period of where you're sort of you're what's that phrase of being consciously aware of your incompetence and just letting it all settle. And that kind of underlying reassurance that this is right in the bigger picture, and it might just take a bit of time for the specifics to come together. Well, and also that you've gone into a training program as well. No one's expecting you to go straight into that
that's job, very true. Definitely.
Well, and I suddenly thought it might be helpful for you just to summarize a little bit of what a probation officer does, because I certainly remember I used to tell people and they were like, all right, what's that? They thought I worked in a prison and all that sort of thing. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing as part of your training and what the role will be when you qualify.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment I work in the community. So there are probation officers in the community and prisons and in courts. But the training is mainly based in the community. So that means basically that I work with people who either have come out of prison and are now back in the community, or people who have been sentenced to probation. So they might not have gone to prison at all, but just were sentenced to probation. So I work with people who have done all sorts of things that kind of led them to be there. And basically a big thing, or kind of the main part, I guess, of what we do is, public protection, making sure that the people that we work with, reducing the risk that they pose to society in general, basically. And I think there's a kind of a tagline of the Probation Service, which is preventing victims by changing lives. So I quite like that as a summary of, you're kind of helping the people that have done wrong things in the past, turn things around, and by doing that, reducing the risk that they pose to other people, and preventing more victims to, come about to, experience offenses, basically. So, you kind of work on finding them employment. You try and help them find suitable housing, accommodation. Mental health support is obviously a big thing, which is something that I'm super interested in as well. So that's always great to kind of work on, basically looking at their life in general and seeing, what bits are difficult, what are they struggling with, and then trying to work with them to find solutions, which there's not always a solution for everything, but there's always something you can do, or just being someone they can talk to. You're kind of lots of different things at once. You're kind of the therapist. You're sometimes you have to kind of hold their hand a little bit and, encourage them to do something. So you're a bit of a teacher sometimes, or, you take on lots of different roles. But basically it's about helping them turn their life around and, make better decisions in the future. So yeah, that's kind of how I spend my
great
my
summary.
days.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and just so rewarding and so worthwhile to be involved in that. And from what I remember, for some of them, you're a real lifeline. When
Absolutely.
they do really want to stop breaking the law and reoffending and that sort of thing. And yes, definitely. Yes, we're bringing it all back. Very interesting. Well, and I thought it might be helpful to, acknowledge that, I left that career because I think I moved into it when I was too young. I did criminology at uni and, pretty much went straight into it. So I was sort of early 20s.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, it was very up in the air in terms of how it was being funded, and a lot of people were leaving and not being re-employed. From what I understand now, the numbers are a little bit better and the resources are a little bit better. And I think, to be frank, at that point, I just couldn't handle the workload. It just felt like so much. And I remember when, we were working together, there was that sort of dilemma of, how much do I say about why I left that career to somebody who's keen to go into it. But I think it's helpful, to talk to people who have moved away from it for certain reasons, because then you can look at it and think, well, I know what the concerns and the challenges can be. And I remember thinking, gosh, well, she's come from such a high pressured environment anyway. And, obviously I hadn't, I was straight out of uni or whatever. So I imagine, your experience of that workload is very different from mine. And it, God, it's like 20. God, this has so old. It's probably like 20 years ago. So, it's all moved on from then. But yeah, I mean, what was your take on it? Obviously, talking to somebody that had moved away from it.
Yeah, no, I think it was very helpful. I think a lot of the times when, if you're talking to someone who's in the job, who's still doing it, you'll usually get more positive, the more positive side of things, even though everybody has a few things about their job that they don't enjoy or that they would like to change. But like you said, I think knowing exactly what I was getting myself into, by knowing, what the negatives were as well, I was able to make a more informed decision about, do I think I can do this, and do I think it's right for me, and kind of not having, any surprises by the time I kind of got there and started the job. Things are not ideal, but at least I knew what it might be like. And, I think as a trainee, your workload is much lower, obviously, than once you're qualified. So, but I do see my colleagues, having big workloads as well. And I'm kind of using the time doing training to kind of prepare myself for that and find ways to deal with it. And, I'm sure it has changed since you were there. And I think if I would have gone there straight out of university, I probably wouldn't have been the right thing for me either. I think, I started it when I was 27, so a year ago. I think for me, that was at the right time, both in terms of my work experience and, kind of having gone through stressful and demanding roles already, but then also just as a person, I kind of felt like, I was emotionally ready to take it on, because it can be a very emotionally draining job as well. So, I felt I was ready for that at that time, but a few years before then, I probably wouldn't have made that decision. So I think it's about looking at, I guess, what's right at the time, given your circumstances and, resources and all definitely. That. So it was definitely helpful to hear the bad things.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Fundamentally, that we're all just so different, and what works for one person, doesn't, absolutely. And vice versa. So, Okay, fascinating. And I suppose just to finish off then, what maybe let's think of 3 key bits of advice for people who are maybe considering a career change.
Yeah. So I think one thing is not rushing it. Because I think,
that's a good one.
We worked together over quite a long time. I think it must have been, I don't know if it was a year, but almost. It was quite a long time that we kind of worked together. And I think, and I think, taking that time was really important for me, because from my first job out of uni, I kind of rushed into the other job, and I really didn't want that to happen again, because I think, I really wanted to think through the next decision that I was going to make, because it was going to be a big change. So I think if it's possible, if people want to change their career, taking their time is, I think, quite important, so that you have time to think about all your ideas. And, sometimes in one moment, something might be like, oh, this is perfect for me. But then actually, if you think about it, and if you, take the time to go out and talk to people and gather more information, you might figure out, oh, actually, that's not ideal. But equally, if you have an idea at one moment and it still feels like the right thing to do a few months later, after you've gathered all that information, then you can also be more confident about the decision. So I think that is one massive thing that I realized was very helpful for me. That it wasn't, all within, a few weeks. Yeah. Another thing.
So number 1, take your time. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Number 2? Yeah.
Number 2, I would say, is don't kind of narrow down your options too early. I think it was really helpful for me to start very broad and just write everything down, even if it's the craziest idea that you have, something that you might want to do. I think on my list, I had like wedding planner or something, just because I thought, oh, that might be fun. So I put it on the list. I never really considered it much further, but I was like, okay, maybe that will be something I want to do.
Yeah.
And just giving yourself the permission almost to dream about all those different things, and, looking at everything, and, even considering having, more of a portfolio career, not just doing one thing, but maybe if it works out, you can do multiple things, so not kind of limiting yourself too early. And I think just keeping on adding information to, your database in your brain, or even writing it down, I think that was helpful for me, because it took me a while to let go of some ideas. Like I said earlier, I was like, oh, maybe I really have to do this. But then over time, through kind of a natural process, I was able to let go of that. And I think if I had just said that in the beginning, that I would always have it in the back of my mind and always be thinking back to something that wasn't right. So I think, that's my number 2 tip to kind of keep in mind.
So it sounds like it's kind of, giving yourself permission to think really big, because then you feel like you've explored, I say all your options, it's never going to be all your options, but it's there's something psychologically reassuring that you feel like you've explored all your options and then arrived at this decision. Okay, great. And number 3?
I think number 3 would for me be kind of, sounds a bit cheesy, but following your heart and listening to your gut when you find something, or even if you find multiple things that just feel right, even if I don't know, a friend might say, oh, that doesn't sound great, or do you really want to do that? Even if somebody else maybe questions it, but for yourself, like, this is the right thing for me, then I think honoring that, because you've put in the work, you've gone through all the options, and you've gathered all the information, good things and bad things about the jobs. But if it feels right, you'll kind of know. I think, at least for me, it was that way. I kind of just knew. And then, I had some people in my life who were like, oh, is this really a good idea? But it's like, yes, it is a good idea. It's, what I want to do now. So yeah, listening to your, to yourself, not to others.
Yeah. Definitely.
Which is difficult.
That's a great one. Yeah, absolutely. And it happens so much though. I don't know why. I think we just confuse people when we step out of our boxes, and it feels very uncomfortable when they don't know what box to put us in anymore.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, great that you were able to, just hold it to yourself that, no, this is what's right for me. And thanks for expressing your concern, but I am moving on regardless.
Exactly.
Okay. And whilst you were talking, it triggered what my great question was going to be earlier, which has finally come back to me. It was about the yoga. So having done or doing the yoga teaching, are you thinking you might bring a bit of that into your career as well then, or?
Yes, actually. So on one hand, I'm actually going to start doing yoga classes for my colleagues. So, I can kind of combine it with work a little bit, which I'm looking forward to. But then also through, I was thinking like, how can I combine my job and yoga in a way? I came across a charity that actually, provides training for yoga teachers to teach yoga in prisons to people in prison. And, that's now something that I'm going to work towards as kind of, you need some experience teaching and things like that, because obviously it's different from a normal yoga class that you would teach. But, I think I found a good way of combining it, even though it will be voluntary. So it's not something that I would get paid for, but it's just something I really want to do. So yeah, I'm going to looking to combine the two in a way that I, hadn't even thought about before. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, definitely. It was giving me goosebumps a little bit. No, that's great. Well, yeah, what a lovely way to, as you say, combine your interests. And I think that's the thing with careers. Sometimes we think that just one job has to tick all these boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's getting creative about how you can weave things together. So it is a bit of a portfolio, and sometimes it's semi-interlinked, as you say. Sometimes it's not, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
So great. Very inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hannah. It's been really great to catch up and hear about your career change and where you are now. And yeah, once again, thank you for speaking to us whilst on your holiday. I will now let you get back to the Sicilian sunshine.
Thank you.
And wish you all the best with the training and the yoga. And I hope you really enjoy qualifying and moving into the profession, and that the longer term career that comes with that too, by the sounds of it. So fantastic.
Thank you very
much. All right,
much.
then. Thanks again. And
Thank
I'm sure
you.
we'll speak soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Bye. You too.
Bye. Bye.